calculus is basically the study of rate of change. And gradient is the rate of change. Okay? So just to recap, if the gradient is positive, it means something is increasing. If the gradient is negative, so if the line is going this way, it's decreasing. So gradient of a curve, right, shows the rate of change of y as x changes. Okay, and I'll explain what that means in more detail when I actually do the question. Few definitions. Tangent is a straight line that touches a point on the curve only once, which we'll be doing as well, and I'll show you later. At turning point, gradient is 0. All right, so girls, let's get straight into it. In the first question, basically, this is the original graph, f of x. Okay, what they want you to do is sketch f dash x, which means sketch the gradient of this. That's what this little dash means, okay? It means if you differentiate this, means find the gradient function. So the first step, girls, is to label plus, minus, and 0 sign all over the curve. What that means, girls, if I draw a tangent, and this is what a tangent is, it's basically a straight line that just touches the curve once, okay? What gradient sign is that based on that? Negative, it's going down. So that means all of this part of the graph, okay, all of this part of the graph are negative. All the way up until here, girls, I've told you if the gradient is straight line, what's the gradient? 0, that's right, okay? Now, same thing, let's draw a tangent on this side of the graph. What's happening to this side of the graph? It's increasing up until here, gradient is 0. And once again, if I draw a tangent here, the gradient is negative all over this part of the graph. Okay, so what we want to do now is convert these gradient signs into y values on the new graph. All right, and here's how you do it. Before I do, second step, label on the x-axis where the gradient is 0. What that means is, see how the gradient is 0 at this point? If you go back to the x-axis, just label that point. Let's call it x1. It can be like any value, like 1, 2, no, minus 1, minus 2, whatever. Just label the point on the graph where the gradient is 0 on the x-axis, because, okay, I'm going to label those two same points on my new graph. So x1, x2. The reason why I need to label those points, girls, is that means this means 0 gradient on my new graph means y equals to 0 on my new graph. What that means on my new graph means it has to go through those 2 points. Secondly, the way I like to do it easily, girls, see how these are all negative values? Okay? What that means, girls, this part of the graph now becomes this. And the reason why I drew that is because, girls, what y values are all of this part of the graph? Negative, yes? Negative 1, negative 2, negative 3, and so on. Okay? So these negative signs become negative y values on my new graph. So, as a number, what this means is I've got all these negative values going up but approaching up to 0. So you could think of these negative signs like negative 5, negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, and then 0. Can you see that as the y values here? Yeah, negative 5, negative 4, negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0. So do you see what I'm doing? I like to do the end part of the graph first. So girls, let's have a look at over here. So once again, it has to go through here and see after this 0 point, they're all negative values. So what am I going to draw here? Line up or below the x-axis? Below, because these are all negative y values. Yep? Yeah, it doesn't matter how I draw it, just draw a line. Now let's fill in the middle here. Girls, all of the values between x1 and x2 are positive, which means they are going to be above or below the x-axis. Above. So just connect it. It just needs to be a curve. Yeah, can you see that? You're just connecting the dots, basically. So this is your graph of f dash x. Okay? Yeah, f dash means gradient. All right, let's go through this. So once again, all these values are what? Positive. But up until here is 0. Here is negative 0. Okay, this is the easy part. It's actually getting the graph that's hard. All right, so I've got that. I also need to label that, so that I'll call it x1. Just draw a smaller one? All right, I hope the camera's getting that. Okay. All right, so I've done step number 1. Step number 2, label on the x-axis where gradient is 0. So it has to go through x1 and x2. So x1, x2. Okay, once again, let's look at this end part of the graph. So I've got all these positive values. So that means on this part of the graph, am I going to draw above or below the x-axis? Above. Yep, so just think of this as like step number 1 here. Let's do this end of the graph now, step number 2. So on this part of the graph, above or below x-axis? Below, because that's below, yep, y values. Now, tricky part, girls, now I've got this part. I've got negative and then positive. So after this, I've got negative y values. And then from here, girls, can you see what it might look like? I need a graph, I need to fill in between here. I need to have a curve that's below, goes through 0, then above the x-axis. See if you can picture it. It's actually this. Oops. Does this make sense? Yeah? This is the negative part of the graph here. And then it goes through 0. And then this is the positive part of the graph. Okay? Let's do the same thing here. Simple example. Any other questions? All right, so a simple example. So girls, on this end of the graph, so before x1, what am I drawing? Above or below? Below. But from here onwards, it's positive. So it's just a straight line. Can you see that? This is a negative part. This is a positive part.